Good evening. I'm Chris Brown, Chicago Public Library's Library Commissioner, and I'm so pleased you're joining us tonight as we celebrate the finale of our 2021 One Book, One Chicago season, marking 20 years of bringing Chicago together through literature and reading. Because for the past year, we've had to do so much distancing from our friends and family and neighbors. That's why this year we're celebrating our connections with the theme of neighborhoods, our city's bedrock, through the work of native Chicago author Eric Charles May and his novel Bedrock Faith. We invite you to visit us online at onebookonechicago.org for additional reading recommendations and on-demand digital content. But One Book, One Chicago wouldn't be possible without our supporters, Bank of America, Union Pacific Foundation, Illinois Humanities, and other generous donors to the Chicago Public Library Foundation. Eric Charles May also happens to be a 21st Century Author Award recipient, which are presented annually by the Chicago Public Library Foundation, and you can visit cplfoundation.org to watch this year's exceptional honorees, Jane Nicole Brooks, Theaster Gates, and Amy Tan, as well as learning all about how this incredible partnership between our Library Foundation and our city's library helps change lives in Chicago. During tonight's program, we encourage you to submit questions in the chat for Q&A after the conversation. And now I'm so excited to welcome tonight's guest, Eric Charles May, author of our 2021 One Book, One Chicago selection, Bedrock Faith. He'll be joined by interviewer Donna Seaman, who's joined us for so many incredible conversations with unforgettable authors. And we're so pleased she could be with us again tonight. Donna Seaman is the adult editor at Booklist, a member of the content leadership team for the American Writers Museum, a recipient of the Louis Shore Award for Excellence in Book Reviewing, the James Friend Memorial Award for Literary Criticism, and the Studs Terkel Humanities Service Award. Seaman has written for the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, and other publications. She's been a writer in residence for Columbia College Chicago and has taught at Northwestern University and the University of Chicago. Seaman created the anthology In Our Nature, Stories of Wilderness. Her author interviews are collected in Writers on the Air, Conversations About Books, and she's the author of Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists. Eric Charles May is an associate professor in the fiction writing department at Columbia College Chicago. A Chicago native and former reporter for the Washington Post, his fiction has appeared in the magazines Fish Stories, F, and Criminal Class. In addition to his Post reporting, his nonfiction has appeared in Sport Literate, the Chicago Tribune, and the personal essay anthology, Briefly Knocked Unconscious by a Low-Flying Duck. Bedrock Faith is Eric's first novel. Throughout the past few months, we've all watched as Chicagoans across the city came together to read, discuss, and explore Bedrock Faith. Our imaginations have been captivated by Eric's writing as we've laughed and cried and puzzled along with characters Mrs. Maudley, Stewpot, and the rest of the Parkland neighborhood. Eric's book, which so wonderfully depicts the important ties we have as Chicagoans with each other and our neighborhoods, comes at the perfect time as we reconnect as a city. We are so happy to be able to celebrate his wonderful novel through One Book, One Chicago. And now it's my honor to welcome Eric Charles May and Donna Seaman to the Chicago Public Library virtual stage.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor to be here. I want to thank the mayor and the commissioner and everyone at Chicago Public Library who supported One Book, One Chicago. It's incredible. This is the 20th anniversary. Congratulations, Eric, for being
Thank you.
here. And welcome everyone outside. We are so happy to be in person instead of talking to my laptop. Eric, I look forward to talking about your book. And I thought that I would begin with asking you about Parkland, the
Yes.
far south side neighborhood. Your description in the opening pages is so precise, so vivid. Can you talk about the origins of the place?
I actually invented Parkland for a novel that I started in the 80s, but I put it down. Because for a number of reasons. The main reason being I couldn't figure out a way to write it. And so I was going to set a good part of that novel in this invented neighborhood on the far south side. So, okay, go forward a few years, and then I got the idea for Bedrock Faith and realized I came up with the situation first. And then I realized very quickly that this neighborhood that I had kind of worked up sometime in the past would be the perfect place to, in fact, put it. And in fact, in some ways, would be a more compelling story than the original novel I had started with, because this one was going to be focused strictly in the neighborhood. The first one was going to be, part of it would have been in Parkland, and part of it would have been in Lincoln Park, and part of it would have been in East Rogers Park, and so this worked out better.
Interesting. So you grew up in Chicago.
Yes.
And what neighborhood was your neighborhood?
Morgan Park, the far south side on 111th Place in Racine. And it's also the neighborhood that my mother grew up in. Her family moved there when she was about 3. And the part of Morgan Park that I lived in has been an all-black neighborhood since it was Prairie. And it's a very sort of school-centered. John D. Shoup School was the main school then. If you're at the 111th Street exit on the expressway on the Dan Ryan, if you look up, there's a grade school hard by the expressway there, just east of it, and that's John D. Shoup. Also, where all of my siblings and I graduated from there, as did my mother, and all of her siblings. And my mother taught there for most of her teaching career. So it was a neighborhood where if folks didn't know you, they knew your parents, or they knew your grandparents, or they knew your aunts, and sometimes all of them. And so I had to walk by. It was a 4-block walk to school. I had to walk by 4 churches just to get to the grade school. And so it was very grounded. It was a very grounded neighborhood, and very safe. Almost maybe hard for some folks to believe now, but there was hardly any police presence in the neighborhood. You rarely ever saw a police car because there wasn't any need. When folks would go away to like Starved Rock for a summer Sunday afternoon excursion or something, it was not uncommon for folks to leave their windows open. They'd lock the doors, but they'd leave the windows open in the summertime because it was that kind of a place. So it was the basis in terms of the kind of neighborhood I wanted to create for my novel. I was drawing upon that, and not just from my experience, but from what my mother had told me about growing up out there, and her childhood, and seeing the gas man who would ride down the street on a bicycle and get off and light each gas lamp.
Oh, wow. That is going back.
At night. And, the men selling ice off of a truck, and they'd hit hook with the curved hooks, and they'd bring it in and put it in the base of the ice box. And that a lot of people, there were a lot of vacant lots. Even when I was a kid there, and people would grow produce. Wow. I remember as a kid walking, down streets and seeing lots full of corn and cabbages and onions and that sort of thing. And, yeah, my mom said that when she was a girl, blacks further in the city used to call Morgan Park the country and not in a complimentary way. But it was a great place to grow up because nothing much happened. And, and when you're a kid, you don't need much. A park to play baseball and go swimming in, a place to ride your bicycle and whatnot. And so it was a very sort of, it was kind of like a small town, even though it was officially part of Chicago, because there were white neighborhoods to the east and west, northeast and northwest, and for many years, just south of 115th Street before Maple Park was built, starting in the late 50s. It was just grass, and so it's kind of like a little island in a way, but not in a bad way, because we had everything. We had a drugstore, we had a hardware store. It wasn't like as a child I was wanting for a whole lot.
So you have described Parkland
Yeah.
in so many ways. So clearly it was a big inspiration to you.
It was.
And the detail that you bring to it, and we're set on the 1800 block of 129th Street in Parkland, and you describe every business on their business strip, every household, with such attention to detail.
Yeah. And some of that just comes from my training.
Yes, as a journalist.
As a journalist, but also at Columbia College as a student. And I came up through the story workshop program at Columbia College, and it was all about being, kind of a specificity. Not specificity ad nauseum, but specificity in trying to get the precise image, the right, so that the reader could see it.
Yeah.
And I also knew that, what kind of neighborhood I was going to be dealing with. And, a lot of times when you say African American or all black neighborhood, even among some African Americans, they immediately see a certain kind of neighborhood. And a neighborhood that's impoverished. And I didn't want my readers for one moment being confused about where they were. And so I wanted to establish it very clearly. So I did the thing they always tell you never to do when you're writing a novel. I put a prologue.
Yes,
in
I
the beginning.
love the prologue.
And so, because again, I wanted to make sure that folks knew where they were.
And it's so effective and beautifully written too. So it's set in the year 1993. Was there a particular reason for that?
It was one of the few years in Illinois where there were no elections. And because Chicago is such a political town, if you have an election going in Chicago and you're setting a novel in that year, it's going to be real hard not to let that into the novel. And I knew it was going to be really neighborhood based. I knew the alderman of the area was going to be part of the story. And I said, if I have an election going on, this is going to divert the story in a certain way. I also didn't want the O.J. Simpson thing to be going,
right.
because that would have been weird to have an all-black neighborhood and that happening and nobody in the neighborhood talking about it. So I had to look around and kind of go, okay, what year did they have? No mayoral elections. Okay, nothing for Congress. No one for Illinois governor. The Illinois governor one made it really difficult because that one was like the wild card. It used to be they used to have the Illinois governor's election when you would have the presidential election,
right?
But then they moved it, and so I had to kind of make sure of that. And also, I liked the '90s because there weren't any cell phones, and I wasn't going to have. And I knew there was going to be a lot of going back and forth between neighbors, and it's not that doesn't happen with cell phones, but it changes it.
Yes.
If you have a story set in a neighborhood and there's texting, a lot of the conversations or interactions that people are going to have, they're going to be texting or they're going to be calling each other on the phone, and I didn't want to have that, and so. All of those things kind of came together. I said, yeah, 1993 is a good year.
That is excellent. All right, so let's talk about characters.
Yes.
The main character, whom I love. Now, I will say that I read this novel when it first came out and loved it. And so rereading it, I loved how much I remembered. It just crackled right back up. But there was a lot more. This is a book to read several times, I would say. And so I loved Mrs. Motley even more this time. She is she changes, she evolves through this novel in so many interesting and nuanced ways. But let's talk about her just at the start. And what inspired her?
Well, I wanted to have someone engage with this guy who moves back to his neighborhood after being in prison for 14 years.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted someone who's was going to be responsive, but not necessarily responsive in a way that is negative. You need somebody in the story who, through who they are, is going to be tussling. And so you want someone who maybe isn't as, I wouldn't say it's not a problem of not being decisive, but you want someone who isn't going to take charge. You want someone who's going to kind of be, through who they are, going to be buffeted some way by what happens. So I didn't want to have an aggressive neighbor, because then that becomes a different kind of story. And I wanted someone who was going to be impacted by this guy coming back to the neighborhood, not the other way around. So I was looking for someone kind of demure to a certain degree, and she was really based on a lot of the women I knew as a child. These were the women who were the parents of the kids I played with. They were women who were my school teachers at John D. Shoup School, who taught at Sunday school at Arnett AME Chapel there on 112th and Place in Bishop, and a lot of them were these women who, when I think about my mom and her colleagues, were women who were oftentimes some of the first people in their family to graduate from college. And who were raising families and working professionally, and all of them seemed to have marvelously cursive handwriting, and they went to church and raised their kids, and the kind of women I would see when I would go to my grandmother's house, and my mother and her sisters and my grandma would be sitting in the kitchen talking. And there's a kind of a sensibility that comes out of, if you want to call it, an African-American woman aesthetic. And you see it when you read like the narrative sections. You see a similarity in the narrative sections of novels written by Toni Morrison, or Gloria Naylor, or even Ann Petrie. Her novel, The Narrows, that came out in the 90s, and in the 1950s, I'm sorry. And you see this kind of sensibility running through it. And I wanted a character who would be able to embody that kind of a sensibility.
So the writers you just named who write about similar women are women.
Yeah.
You are a man.
Yes.
And you wrote so convincingly because Mrs. Motley is the mind we enter.
Yeah.
The rest of it's omniscient narration, but we know what she's thinking and feeling, and it's fascinating. What was it like for you to inhabit?
Well, here again is where Columbia College comes into play. They gave us a wide variety of work to read when we were students.
Yeah.
And what you learn is that there's many writers who are able to step into the head of the opposite sex and write about it effectively, because there are certain things that are just human.
Right.
Being afraid, it is not male being afraid and female being afraid. There's not male happy and female happy. Now, different things may trigger them, but the emotion itself, feeling threatened, is feeling threatened. Feeling helpless is feeling helpless. which is what Mrs. Motley feels at certain times, being at 6s and 7s about what should I do about this is a human response. It's not to either sex. And so what I try to do, what you do is you go to the human response thing, as in trying to bring out that character, and that's how I was able to do her, but also the other women in the novel. You know, Irma Smedley and Mrs. Butler and
Mrs. Hicks.
Yeah, and Mrs. Hicks, and you see it, and other authors who are able to do that. You know, when Toni Morrison writes about Charlie Breedlove, or when she writes about Macon Dead, you know, or when Ann Petrie and with the male characters in her novels, and you never read them thinking like, oh, okay, this is a woman writing from a man's point of view, because they go to what is the human, the most basic human response to things, and let that carry it.
Exactly. Before we move on from Mrs. Motley, she's a school librarian.
Yes.
And I just wanted to ask you about the role of libraries in your childhood.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
You know, the Walker Branch Library there at 111th and Hoyt. It was the first library that I went to. It was the library of our neighborhood. A marvelous building. I think it's the oldest, in terms of age, the oldest building that the Chicago Public Library owns.
Nice.
And it has these marvelous stone turrets. And I remember the first evening my father took me there, me and my brother Mark. It was weekday evening in the summertime. And I would go there after school during the school year, but also during the summer I would walk from our house and go there and get books and take them home. And it was like, you know, it was just one of the places in the neighborhood besides the school and the church we went to. It was the place in the neighborhood that I went to the most outside of our house. And it fueled I said, you know, it was the part of the foundation of my imaginative life.
Yeah.
It came out of the books I got out of that. I got out of that library.
Did you think about becoming a writer at that young age?
Not at that age.
No?
You know, that came later, at Columbia College again. But I didn't start off thinking I was going to be a writer. I just loved to read. And my imagination. I just loved getting lost in books. And so it was, but I wasn't thinking about being a writer at the time myself. I was a little boy, so I was thinking Major League Baseball player, you know, astronaut, you know, that sort of thing was what was firing my imagination as far as a career was concerned.
But you did become a reporter. You wrote.
I did, yeah. Eventually, I was a reporter at the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Which was but interesting.
Interesting, yes.
In a good way.
Well, I really detect that in your fiction, that attention to detail, that you know, that habit of observation, that you know, the specificity you spoke about.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, you know, I had that. Actually, what happened is that all of that training that I got before I became a reporter really helped being a reporter. And then being a reporter, where it really helped was in things like transitions. Because transitions are everything in journalism. You know, it's all in the transitions. And I found that introducing a character fictionally was not that much different than introducing a person to readers like in a feature story. But I did learn how to write a little more concisely. And I learned about deadlines.
Deadlines.
I learned about deadlines, and I used to have a little index card on the side of my monitor. You know, sooner or later you got to sit down and write it, and you know that you can't not necessarily wait for the muse to
No.
lovingly float down and rest upon one's shoulder. You got to get down and just hunker down and write it.
Well, and that, the responsibility of journalism, that authenticity that's in this novel is just so there. So let's move to Mrs. Motley's and the whole neighborhood's nemesis, Stu Pot.
Oh gosh,
Reeves.
yes.
Oh gosh. Now,
Yeah.
to me, reading this book, I started feeling like Stu Pot was like a character out of folk tales. That he was so diabolical but weirdly sympathetic. I mean, he's such a larger than. So please tell us about Stu Pot.
Yeah, I mean, he. The genesis of him was I started when I was living in Washington. And I was watching something on television, and there was some feature news show about some white kid in the South, maybe 7 or 8 years old, something like that, who was terrorizing his classmates and playmates by telling them that they were going to hell and that their parents were going to hell because they were not sufficiently religious.
Wow.
And he was causing quite a stir, and the playmates and the classmates were all coming home crying. And the teachers couldn't really do anything about it because he wasn't threatening to beat them up or take their lunch money or something. I mean, today they would probably get him on bullying. But they were frustrated that there was nothing that they could do with this kid. And I remember they showed a little clip of him, and he looked just absolutely like frightening. To me, with the sort of smile and eyes of like, yeah, you're going to hell, and I was that's what struck me as a writer is the situation. Someone is doing something harmful, but they're doing it in such a way you can't do anything about it, and that's just inherently dramatic. And I filed it away the way writers will do. Oh, that's an interesting situation. All right, maybe I can use it somehow. And a few years later, I'm still in D.C., and I saw something on 60 Minutes about a guy on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, I believe, who was terrorizing people there. He would get off the bus, and he would start walking up to women and start yelling at them. Now, again, he wasn't threatening to rob them. He would just start yelling. Well, you can imagine you're pushing a pram down the street with your kid in it, and some guy walks up and starts yelling at you. That's going to be pretty scary. But they couldn't, charge him with anything because he would only do this when he was off his meds. And again, I was struck by this thing of someone's doing something harmful, but they're doing it in a way that you can't do anything about it. And I think a Law and Order actually did an episode based on this. Of course, being Law and Order, there was a murder. And then I thought, wait a minute, what about that kid? And I said, well, what if instead of a kid terrorizing other kids with the Word of God, what if it was an adult terrorizing other adults? That would ramp things up way higher. And I said, that's a really interesting story. And then the first image that I had of Stu Pot, which actually never made it into the novel, was Stu Pot standing in front of a 2-flat on a cloudy afternoon. I saw it as a Sunday afternoon. And the weather is cool, and he's standing in front of this 2-flat reading from an open Bible. And a very loud voice. And folks across the street are coming to their picture windows and their doorways of the fronts of their homes and seeing him and not knowing what to make of it. And that was kind of like the first image that I had. And then when I was thinking, well, where can I set this? I remembered the neighborhood that I had invented for this other novel that I had put down, and I realized this is a perfect marriage. And I was very happy that I was not going to have to invent the location of this novel from scratch, that I already had it kind of in my head. And it was also going to finally give me, I felt I had a story that would finally give me the ability to write about a place I had been wanting to write about for a long time, which is the kind of world that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And so Stu Pot grew from that. And the name was when I was growing up in Morgan Park, a lot of kids had nicknames.
Right.
There was Butch and Squeaky and Junebug and Tech and
what was
Pippi
yours?
and there was this kid over around the next block on 112th Street whose nickname was Stupot.
Oh.
And he was actually a nice kid. And because I was looking around, I was just going down the list of nicknames from my old neighborhood, and then came across, I remembered his, and I said, yeah, that's the one. That's the nickname. That's the nickname to give him. And which is also the name of a character in the musical South Pacific, which ties in with Mrs. Motley, who has musicals in her. It's one of the things she listens to. So.
That's great. So did you have a nickname? I have to ask you.
I wanted one very badly. And I thought, my name is Eric. My nickname should be Ricky. That makes sense. I was a logical child.
Yeah.
And so I started telling my friends on the block to call me Ricky, but then my mother heard it and took me aside and said, if I wanted you to be named Ricky, I would have named you Ricky. I don't want to hear anybody calling you Ricky. And that was the end of that. So the Ricky nickname was short-lived. And that was that. So, but I very much wanted the nickname. I thought the nickname would be cool.
Would be cool, right. Yes, we don't get to pick our nicknames.
No.
So Stupot has been in prison
Yeah.
for doing terrible things
Yeah.
in the neighborhood and elsewhere, and he comes back earlier than neighbors expect.
Yeah.
And wreaks havoc in
Yeah.
various ways. So I kept thinking about the title of your novel. It's such a great title, Bedrock Faith. And the novel becomes a drama about faith.
Yeah.
And, when is it rigid and when is it actually compassionate and when is it weaponized and when is it the opposite?
Yeah, everybody in the novel thinks they're doing the right thing. They all have a bedrock faith, and of course, some of them find out later it isn't the right thing. But at the time when they initiate stuff, they think, yeah, bedrock faith, that this is the right thing to do, and so it became a kind of thing that rattled through the whole book, And of course, Stupot thinks he's doing the right thing too, And so it kind of worked out really well. But it came to me when I was walking across the street one night. And sometimes the thing to do when you're working, trying to figure something out is to just let it steep, let it go. Because I had been worrying over a title, and I finally just said, you know what, I'm just going to stop obsessing about it and trust that my imagination will come up with something. And I was walking across the street one night, and suddenly the Bedrock Faith came into my head.
Wow.
And I said, yep, that's it. That's the title.
Now, how far along were you?
I was well along.
Oh.
I was well into the novel at this point. And it's a good thing to remember that, don't sit around waiting for the title.
Get to work.
Get to the writing and trust that something will descend or emerge at some point.
So in this sort of battle between different faiths, different churches, different beliefs. Mrs. Hicks has Christmas in July, which I think is marvelous. But another way this novel is so powerfully structured is that it goes through the year. It goes through the seasons.
Yeah.
It goes through holidays, and parades. How did that become part of it for you?
Because I was really into the novel and it had a lot of pages, and I was getting confused as to where the heck I was. And I said, well, if I'm the author and I'm being confused, the reader's going to be confused. So I started to really build it and structure it so it was very clear about, okay, this is going to be early spring, summer, late summer, fall, late fall, winter.
Yeah.
And so that the reader would be very clear. And one of the nice things about moving a novel through the seasons, if that works for the novel, is that it orders things for the reader too. Okay, springtime. Okay, now it's summertime. Okay, and now and they kind of understand what's going to be the next place that the story is going to go, and also it can allow you to take advantage of hanging certain chapters on holidays.
Yes.
You know, it's like, okay, I have to have something happen at this point. What can I have happen? Well, it's July. Okay, 4th of July.
Barbecue.
You know, yeah, barbecue. You know, da 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 da. I need to have something else happen. Okay, I can come up with this, a homecoming. You know, so sometimes you can kind of look at the calendar, and sometimes you can see that certain events you can start to hang chapters
And
around
also,
certain events. And the great thing about events is that they have beginnings, middles, and ends. So you already have kind of a nice built-in structure. You think of things like The Dead by James Joyce, which is about a dinner party. Well, eventually, folks come to the dinner party, something happens at the dinner party, and then everybody goes home. And so it gives you, I was just saying this to my class this afternoon, it gives you a natural way out of the story. In my case, the chapter. So that in a way that doesn't seem forced, seems normal, seems sensible, so you kind of know where you're going.
And also, I love the seasons too, because you talk about what people do, like,
Yeah.
oh, it's time to garden.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Motley gets her gardening clothes on and cleans up the old stuff and starts with the new. And
Yeah, and it kind of and again, that's where the seasons can really
Yeah.
come in handy, because certain things happen during certain seasons, you know, and you can start to kind of tie what's going on in the story to that. And like I say, it gives you a nice narrative spine, if you will.
yeah. And there's some good history in there. We have a parade, the Parkland's Founders Parade.
Yeah, I invented that one.
Yes.
I needed something to happen. You know, okay, I got to get these people out of here away from their houses. What can I have happen? But that's kind of based on something that they used to do in Morgan Park. They used to have a Roots Day at Ada Park, which is on 112th Place, I guess. And is the park in my part of the neighborhood. And I remember going to some Roots Days with my mom and siblings. And so I said, oh, okay, I'll just give Parkland a Founders Day. And
That was great. It's a great setting. So there's all this trouble and a lot of gossip.
yes.
So when we talk about neighborhoods, you know, we want to talk about good neighbors and all this. And then there's the other side where people meddle in each other's lives and
Yeah.
they gossip. And
Well, I mean, it's the nature of small towns and tight-knit neighborhoods, is that everybody thinks they have a right to get up in your business. and you know, and it just becomes, it's just the thing of that kind of a, you know, that kind of a community where a lot of people, everybody knows everybody else.
yes.
You know,
And for generations.
and that's part of it. Yeah, and sometimes
Some
for
cases,
generations.
yeah.
You know, not just that they know each other because they live near each other. Some of the folks have known each other since they were children.
Right.
You know, one of my third grade teachers was somebody my mother went to high school with. You know, and so it's like when you have that kind of thing going, or when you have older adults who taught the people in the neighborhood who are now adults. Oh, well, of course they feel perfectly, you know, with perfect permission to start meddling in it. I remember this when so-and-so was a little snot-nosed kid running around the neighborhood. Just because they're an adult and have their own children doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship between me and them has changed. And so, you know, there's part of that too.
Yes, that works for Mrs. Motley, and
Yeah.
in a very good way. We're not going to give away any plot points here.
Yeah.
Very suspenseful, but that becomes a really integral part of
Yeah.
the story. And one other thing that really fascinated me about this, and this is because you're such a word person, the attacks that Stupot launches on people involves words, like a diary.
Yeah.
No plot reveals. Signs. The Bible, of course.
Yeah.
I found that so interesting.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things you have to do with a novel is it's got to be stuff that you can put on the page.
Yes.
And so, you know, things that might work really well in the theater or in a film you've got to figure out a way to make the words dramatic. And of course, diaries are things that are secret. And of course, anytime you introduce a secret into the story, it's like a ticking bomb. How long is this secret going to stay secret before, is revealed and, goes off, so to speak. And so these kinds of things like signs and, people
Lots of
writing
scripture.
signs, scriptures and stuff like that. And that kind of thing works really well on the page. And so that's one of the reasons you want to try to use it.
And it was also a great way to examine different aspects of faith.
Yeah,
Battling quotes.
I finally read the Bible. I'm sure my mom was really happy about it.
I was going to ask you if you were raised religiously. Apparently not.
Well, no, we were, but we went to the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and that was kind of, maybe the loudest thing you might have heard when the Reverend was giving the sermon was a very sort of low-key amen. And it was a very, I don't think I ever heard the devil mentioned once. And all the time I went there.
Raving about the devil.
Yeah. So, yes. So, but it was interesting. I mean, the reading of the Bible was actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, you bring up some really interesting
aspects.
I had to look stuff up. I'm like, what?
Psalms is a real revelation, boy. No pun intended. And so that was an interesting thing, and also having to do things like I had a Catholic daily missal, which is where I got the name for the Catholic parish that's in the neighborhood, which is called Seven Sorrows.
Right.
Which is actually, there's like a Feast of Seven Sorrows. Actually, there are two, one in the spring and one in the fall.
Wow.
So, and I felt that would be a perfect name for an African-American Catholic church. That wasn't something weird that I invented, but that was actually coming out of the Catholic calendar itself.
It's also perfect that Stupat launches a newsletter called The Burning Bush, given things that go on in this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's fantastic. So, are you working in any other fiction?
I am.
Oh, good.
I am.
Can you reveal anything?
It's a good bunch of it is set in Parkland.
Oh, we're going to get to go back to Parkland?
We get to go back to Parkland,
Nice.
although this may not be as cheery a trip. Although some of the characters from Bedrock Faith do make an appearance.
Oh.
Mrs. Motley will make an appearance. She's not a major character, but an influential one.
I know fans are going to be happy to hear.
Yeah, so she'll be coming back, and Reggie Butler will be coming back. A much older Reggie Butler with an
Older
interesting,
and wiser?
older, wiser,
Maybe.
with a job that might surprise some people.
Okay.
And there are a couple of other characters who are going to be in this new story that's set. Part of it is going to be set in Parkland, and part of it is going to be set in a. I just can't stop inventing places. In a neighborhood, a suburban village.
Oh, great.
I kind of moved Evanston East and Skokie West, and put
I like it.
a suburban village there.
That's great. I really look forward to reading this. Thank you so much. Now, I know that we have audience questions, I trust. So thank you, everyone, for listening to our conversation, and let's hear from you.
Yeah.
Indeed, we have a question from someone who says, reading this book, I keep thinking about the dog. Are you a dog lover? Why did the dog have to die?
Oh,
Okay. I never had a dog when I was a kid. I wanted one. And I've never owned a dog. But I know people who do. And I kind of needed something. I knew Stupat had a dog that had been terrorizing people people before he went to prison that he named Hitler. And so I figured, well, if he comes back to the neighborhood, he's going to get a dog again. But what would be a name, now that he's had this religious conversion, what would be the proper name for this pit bull? And so he names him John the Baptist. Here's the name of it. But no, I didn't. And one of the things, to answer the end of that last question, sometimes when you're writing the story, I needed to have something happen to Stupat, but that it not be something that happens to him directly.
Right.
And then that's when, as an author, you start looking around for, well, what can I have happen? And you just start looking at what is dear to the character.
Right.
And is there something dear to the character that I can take away? And because also you want to show, because part of what the story is when the neighbors, some of the neighbors, start to retaliate. And this is another case of where people think they're doing the right thing. And sometimes what can happen when people are convinced that they're doing the right thing is that they start doing things that make you go, wait a minute. They start doing things that are in some ways the mirror of what they claim they're against.
Exactly. Yes. Now I have to say that your way of talking about your book is really a master class in writing fiction for everyone out there. I hope you're writing all these tips down. They're extremely helpful.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're a professor of fiction writing, right?
Yeah, you would think, yeah.
We have another question that asks, I love the detail of every character. How many of them were based on people from your own life?
Ooh. Well, Mrs. Motley is kind of a conglomerate character, as I was talking before.
Yeah.
Save for the things I saw on television, Stupat is almost completely wholly imagined. Mrs. Hicks is also another kind of woman that I knew growing up. But it isn't drawn from any one particular person. And they're more like types of people than they are one particular individual. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to think, is there anybody there on that block who, actually, yes. Actually, a couple of the characters, a couple of the police officers.
Oh, the police?
Yeah,
Oh.
but not the mean one.
Okay.
The two of the police officers are drawn from actually a couple of cops
that you knew?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, the woman cop and the
Yeah,
man.
the woman, right, yeah. But the person who asked the question is right. Every single character is so alive.
Yeah. And some of it is just putting yourself in that character's head. Allowing yourself access to, how does this character look at the world, and doing so without judgment.
Yes, without judgment.
Where, even if the character is a type of person who does things or believes in things that you don't believe in, to be able to understand what their motives are and how they view the world. Not completely different from sometimes the thing we have to do with relatives or people that we love.
That's right.
And we understand them. We don't agree with them. We don't necessarily buy into their view of the world, but we understand them. We understand very profoundly why they're acting the way they're acting. And you have to kind of allow yourself to go there with a character and getting into whatever your sense is of the character's language, and what is the character's rationale for why they're doing what they're doing. And to have that play out, because what that happens with a lot of the characters in the novel, you're in their heads and they're rationalizing to themselves why they're doing this.
Right.
A real master of that is James Jones. Particularly if you read his novel, The Thin Red Line, which covers this infantry company on Guadalcanal in the Second World War, and he's going in and out of these different characters, and oftentimes getting into their rationale for why they're doing what they're doing and why they're thinking and why they feel a certain particular way. Ann Petrie is very good at that too in her novel, The Narrow. She really gets into why these different characters in her novel are reacting the way they're reacting and why they are justifying what they're doing. Toni Morrison in Song of Solomon, that's another tour de force of an author doing that. And that really then allows you to bring the reader in and to see that the world as that character sees it. And which brings, again, a kind of an understanding, even if you don't approve of what the character's doing.
Exactly.
You've recommended some good books there, and that sort of leads into this next question from someone is, for both Eric and Donna, what is your favorite fiction title if you had to narrow it down to one book?
Ooh, man.
Such a painful question.
That would be like parents saying, who's my favorite kid? You know, and the reason I say that is it's different novels influence you for different reasons. When I read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison when I was in high school, just knowing that an African American had written a complex novel was very important to me at that point, even though I wasn't thinking about being a writer at that point. But just knowing that that was possible. And I knew as a kid, as a teenager, that parts of Invisible Man were going over my head. I knew I wasn't getting everything. But I knew that an African American had written this, and it was complex, and it was engaging, and it covered a lot of stuff. And just knowing that that was possible for an African American to do was very important. Other novels are important simply because they give you some kind of an influence. They give you a way in to, oh, this is how I can do this. You know, and that would be things like, Interior Monologue from The Thin Red Line and Song of Solomon, The Narrows, but more The Thin Red Line and Song of Solomon. And then other things about just how to, from some detective and noir fiction, how to end a chapter in a kind of a cliffhanger so that the reader wants to go to the next chapter. How can I end this chapter so that it doesn't just end, but it ends with this kind of anticipatory sort of feeling. Other novels, influence you just from the lilt of the language. So that question is hard to answer because there's not one novel that did it all for me. There's certain novels that I've read that I really, really enjoyed, like things like Middle Passage by Charles Johnson. Novels that just really, I was enraptured with, But in terms of a favorite, that's hard. It's almost impossible because so many of them. I've reached a point in my development where I can't just read a novel as a novel anymore. That passed long ago, And so I'm always reading it for not only the story, but also, what is this author doing in terms of craft? What is this author doing in terms of dialogue? What is this author doing, and so on and so on. And so it would be impossible for me to whittle it down to one book,
Yeah, truly.
Yeah.
We have a couple more questions. How was Chicago architecture used as a character, if you felt that you did use Chicago architecture as a character?
Well, sometimes one of the things you want to do to distinguish the characters is you don't want to put them all in the same kind of house. And so one of the ways, Mrs. Motley has a Foursquare, and the Davenports have a kind of They have kind of a barn-like shaped house, and Mr. McTeer lives in a Tudor-style house, and the Hicks family lives in a kind of brick Cape Cod style of a house. And so if you do, and then eventually, and so Alderman Pager lives in this huge sprawling ranch house, which is actually based on a house down the street from where I grew up in. It was owned by a guy named Jack L. Cooper, who owned radio stations. It was a black guy who owned radio stations.
Right.
And I use that as the model for that. So by putting different people in different houses, it kind of identifies them.
Yep.
In a way, and Irma lives in a standalone Georgian-style house at the end of the block. And so by doing that, it kind of helps establish each character's separateness. And so you're able to use architecture as a way of kind of placing things. If you make everything look different, then it helps to keep things from becoming this kind of thing where everything kind of collapses into this kind of sameness for the reader. And also, it's just fun. You can be like amateur architect.
Totally.
And just start designing houses. Architect is another thing I wanted to be when I was a kid.
Okay.
I thought you had to know math to be an architect. Little did I know.
Well, now you get to build imaginary.
Exactly.
Our next question is, had you known someone who was in prison and returned?
Oh, who returned to the neighborhood? Yeah, but they weren't really an influence on this story. I knew a couple of guys who returned to the neighborhood, but it wasn't Morgan Park, actually.
Not disastrously.
No, it was actually South Shore.
Oh,
But it wasn't. I didn't know anybody who came back to Morgan Park. Did anything.
Do you consider your next book a sequel to this?
Well, like I said, some of the characters from Bedrock Faith show up in this next book, and a good part of the novel is set in Parkland, which was not my intention when I started. I was very surprised. I found myself back in Parkland again. I said, well, this is going to be up in this suburb that I invented. And no, a good hunk of it is back in Parkland. And so yeah. But I wouldn't call it a sequel, although I would not rule a sequel out. I've also been thinking about the idea of a prequel.
interesting.
But the prequel would probably be short stories. In fact, I've already published one about Mrs. Motley.
Oh, really?
It was in a collection called We Speak Chicagoese. And it's a story about Mrs. Motley, and it starts with her in the years after Bedrock Faith, but then goes back into her earlier life before the events of Bedrock Faith happened.
Interesting.
And that really intrigued me, and I thought that would be way more interesting than trying to do a prequel novel, which getting a little too much of a historical novel
Yeah, right.
thing, which is, historical novels are great, I just don't know if I necessarily want to do that for this, but so that may happen. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I think we have one final question, and this is actually to both of you. Donna, you have some fans of your writing here too, and folks are wondering what is next for both of you. Eric, you talked a little bit about some of your projects, but tell us more.
What is next for me?
Yeah, what else are you writing about?
Thank you. Actually, I am working on a book. I was invited to write a book about reading and places, book places, libraries, bookstores. So it's sort of going to be a book-length essay, and it'll just be about why reading matters and how that shapes your life and shapes you as a person, and why places like libraries are so very important to us. So it's going to be, it's personal, so it'll be sort of a mix. I never, ever intended to write about myself, but because I've had this amazing reading life and had so many remarkable experiences with writers and other readers and librarians and teachers, I realized that there are lots of stories to tell and books to write about. So thank you so much for that. And we are finished. This has been wonderful, Eric. It was so great to talk to you.
This is absolutely delightful.
And enjoy Bedrock Faith, everyone. If you haven't read it, read it. If you've read it again. Stay tuned for Eric's future books. And thank you, everyone at Chicago Public Library.
Great Christmas present.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Lezak, One Book, One Chicago coordinator. That's all the time we have for tonight, but I want to thank Eric Charles May and Donna Seaman for being here with us tonight and for helping us celebrate the season finale with such a special conversation. Thanks so much to Johnny Temple and Akashic Books and Cheryl Johnston for their work and support in making this wonderful season happen. This year we celebrate the 20th anniversary of One Book, One Chicago. A program does not grow and become a success for 20 years without the dedication and work of many people. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the Chicago Public Library staff, past and present, who have helped make this program what it is today. From the librarians who read, suggest books, write blogs, reading recommendations, and host programs, to the pages who shelve books, to the drivers who deliver them, to the clerks who check them out, to all of our behind-the-scenes staff in marketing, graphics, accounting, HR, janitorial, security, and more who keep the libraries running, safe, and welcoming. Our thanks for being a part of the last 2 decades of One Book, One Chicago. Special thanks goes to the Adult Services Department, especially recently retired Director Craig Davis, who shepherded this project over the last 2 decades. And finally, a very special thanks to our technical staff for producing tonight's program and making all of our virtual programming over the last 1.5 years possible. Please visit onebookonechicago.org for information on reading recommendations, blogs, and so much more. Also, visit the CPL YouTube and Facebook pages for on-demand video content, including from tonight's program. Thanks for being here, and have a great night.